only to me, but to my children. And so she would always talk about her ancestor, Papa Rindy, the proud black African. And she would tell stories about him. His legacy was that he was an educator, that he was literate, that he was self-taught, that he learned to read and taught others to read, and that he was a religious man who taught the Bible.
Right.
And so my mom, again, told these stories all throughout my life, but as she became older and her health began to fail, she started saying to me, I want you to write these things down. I want you to put a family tree together. And this is 2010 and earlier. And at that point, to do the genealogical work, you had to go to archives. It was this major production, not like it is today. And so my mom, as her health failed, it became important to her that we document the oral history of our family. And I promised her I would do that. And when my mom passed, I had guilt and remorse because I had promised her I would do something. There was never any broken promises between us, and I didn't know how to do this. And so I happened to be out for lunch one afternoon, and I stopped into a small ice cream shop, and I talked to the owner, as I did every time I would purchase my lunch. And I shared with him, actually just bared my soul, and you know, my mom passing and dealing with that grief, and the promise that I had made to her really burdened me because I know she went to her grave trusting that this would be done. So I know I had to do it, and I had to figure this out. And I'm just making small talk with him, and Rich, the owner, said, I love to do the genealogical work. Write down what you know, and I will take a shot at it. And you know, I God bless Rich. He was probably about 75 or so or more, a senior back in 2010. I wasn't really sure how much work he could do on the internet and what he could find for me, but he offered, and I appreciated the gesture. I wrote down what I knew, and I locked the shop, and I didn't go right back. But when I did, I walked into the door, and I'll never forget the image of him throwing his hands up in the air saying, where have you been? I found your Papa Rindy on the internet.
Oh, wow.
And I was pretty blown away by that, and I remember thinking, what is my Papa Rindy doing on the internet? And so we exchanged information, email addresses, names and telephone numbers, and he said, I will text you, I will email you the information that I put together. I go back to work, and I get the email, but I'm still not feeling that this is anything that I could use. And it isn't until that evening when I go home, I opened the information that he had sent me, and the first thing I read was about this Harvard scientist, Louis Agassiz, and this ugly race science, this scientific experiment where he chose 7 enslaved people, forced them to strip nude, and pointing to their genitalia and other things, and the stark differences, saying this is not human. And this was done in 1850. And if we, you know, we back up to what is going on in 1850 with the fugitive slave law and the question of slavery or emancipation, and the country was divided over this question. So here we have this Harvard scientist who steps into the discussion with a scientific justification for slavery and racism. And Louis Agassiz was the premier scientist of his day. And so when he spoke, people listened, particularly people in the South who wanted slavery to persist. And there was also something that I later learned, but how involved Harvard's leadership was in the Industrial Revolution in the North. Because we're taught, you know, I was taught as a child, and it wasn't until I was an adult and almost where I am now that slavery was a Southern thing. But what this research revealed for me is that many in the North profited just as much or more
than they did in the South. Absolutely. It was a business.
It was
all about a business.
And so here is Harvard giving scientific justification for black inferiority, white supremacy, and slavery. And this scientist, history, not me, this is what history has described this man as. Louis Agassiz is the father of medical apartheid. This scientific experiment that he embarked upon was used to show that black women don't feel pain.
Right.
And this spawned a whole another line of
Mhm.
research on
Mhm.
enslaved people
Mhm.
and particularly women.
Mm-hmm.
The father of medical apartheid, the father of apartheid,
Mhm.
the father of the eugenics movement.
Yeah.
I mean, just a history. The history describes this man as the
Mhm.
premier racist,
Mhm.
and he was a Harvard. He was a company guy for
Mhm.
Harvard.
Mhm.
And so when I learned about this science and this experiment, I was torn because my oral history about this enslaved man was that he was an educator.
Yeah.
That he was self-taught. He learned to read and taught other people to read. And so how could they be using him
Mm-hmm.
as a symbol of black inferiority when actually what he exemplified was black excellence? And I say that because I later got a copy of Noah Webster's Blueback Speller and took a look at it. And I know, as far as I've gone in school and all that I've done in my life, I know that I could not have taken that book as a person who couldn't read and teach myself to read. And I would challenge anyone to look at this book and ask yourself, if you don't know how to read, would you be able to teach yourself to read? But our enslaved ancestors were doing this. And what it suggests to me, because again, history has taught us that our ancestors were illiterate.
Right. Exactly.
And did not.
Exactly.
When you do the research, when you dig into your family histories, you'll find that they knew how to read and write. Now they couldn't go out and promote this because they could be killed or punished for being, but they were literate.
Right.
They were literate slaves that had to hide the fact that they were intelligent.
Absolutely.
And so I reach out to Harvard when I learn how my ancestors were used to say, hey, you got the wrong person here. The man that you chose to be the symbol of black inferiority was anything but
that, right.
And you have to correct the narrative. And from the very beginning, when I reached out to them in 2010, really to this moment, they have not seriously looked at my research. They have not looked at the information that shows the direct line from the man in that image to me. And they have dismissed me. They have said, publicly they're saying, oh, we're studying our ties to slavery and we hope to learn from these things. And all the while, privately, they're squashing and